tonight at least.
Is that looking? You kind of looked at the inspection part where you guys are going to be doing your 4-inch pipes. That should all be ready for you to go next week. So next week, plan on through that week trying to do your WPS for 4-inch pipe. Those should be here ready for you to go. I got another take on how to cut those. I should get them prepped where they already have the bevel on them. So all you have to do is prep them a little bit and weld them together. I don't care whether you weld them in the garage or.
You're just gonna part them off?
Huh?
Are you just gonna part them off?
No, got a beveler. So we're just gonna plain cut the bevels. Unless you guys wanna cut your own bevels.
I don't care.
Just trying
It's
to get
not
you.
thick though, right?
No, it's I think it's 219 wall.
As long as it's cut square, like relatively, I don't care.
Yeah, these will be beveled. These will be 30-degree beveled. So all you'll have to do is take them and sand them a little bit. Some guys just wire brush them, but I like to sand them down to white metal so that it's no oxide on it at all.
Yeah.
So however you prep that, it's up to you, whatever your WPS says. And then your gap is per your design drawing, and you're going to weld those together, and then you're going to cut the straps out to prove your procedure and yourself as a welder. We talked a little bit about how to pull those straps. We're going to move on from that. Talk about the inspection and testing of production wells. The first thing you have to realize is who has the right to do that. If you're an independent contractor and you're doing welding somewhere on a structure, or you're an independent welder and you get called to do a DOT repair weld on a truck somewhere, which I do quite a bit, have done quite a bit, who has the right to determine if it's done right? Well, in most cases, it's going to fall back on you, but most of the time. But in the code, it says the company shall have the right to inspect all wells by non-destructive or by removing wells and subjecting them to mechanical tests. The inspection may be made during the welding or after the weld has been completed. Frequency of inspection shall be as specified by the company. So if you're an engineer for a company, or you're a welding inspector for a third party or for that particular company, you have the right to walk up and inspect what's going on at any time. You can stop the welding at any time for visual inspection. Yeah, you boys go ahead and put the root passes in that, and then I want to see the root passes. Well, we only have a 2-minute window. I'll be right here, so I want to see the root passes before you put hot pass on. You have the right to do that as a third-party inspector or as the company engineer. The contractor can't tell you, no, when we get done, we'll call you. No. You have the right to stand right there and watch them weld. Put on a helmet if you want to and watch them weld. You have the right to that. Notice down here that I've highlighted tree panning methods of testing shall not be used. What's tree panning?
What's what?
Tree panning. Tree panning?
No idea.
Isn't it like actually cutting through?
Yeah. If somebody has a brain anomaly physiologically, sometimes they'll bore a hole through your skull and they'll go in and they'll inspect. And then they'll put the plug back in there and glue it, and the bone will actually mend itself. That's known as tree panning. It's an old medical technique that they used to use. They used to use it when people exhibited like craziness or mental abnormalities. They would drill a hole in their brain to relieve the pressure.
Yeah. And poke around.
Yeah, but tree panning was a method that was used if you had it's still done. But if you make a weld like this, and you wanna see the inside of that, you take an X-ray or something like that, and you see something you don't like, I guess I need to make it more three-dimensional. So if we have a weld here, that's our weld. And, this is continuous over here. So the pipe goes on like that. But you wanna go in here, they would drill a hole in the pipe, and then they would go in with an optical device, and they would look. And then you would take the plug and you put it back in there and you weld the plug back in. They had lots of problems with that. So you can't drill a hole to it to test it. There's another thing in there. It says you cannot use radiography. You can't use X-ray or UT to locate areas of the weld that are sound so that you can take your destructive tests out. You see what I'm saying? Some companies will, if you're doing a destructive test, they'll X-ray them first, and they'll go, well, don't pull your straps right here, pull your strap right here, and here, and here. Yeah. Can't do that. And that's in the document. We'll probably see it. I thought it was right here, but it's probably further down the page. So, rights to inspect and methods of inspection. I didn't highlight this, but non-destructive may consist of radiographic or other method specified by the company. The well shall be evaluated on the basis of either Section 9, which we're going to look at, or at the company's option, Annex A. Annex A is an alternate means of examination that comes at the end of this code. There's Annex A and there's Annex B. Typically it's called Appendix B. Appendix B deals with welding that goes on when a vessel or a line or something is charged with pressure. There's a lot of welding that goes on in charged lines, charged vessels. So Appendix B we'll take a look at later on if we get to it. Okay, so next thing is the qualification of the inspection personnel. This is the interesting thing to me. Welding inspection personnel shall be qualified by experience and training for the specified inspection task they perform. Their qualifications shall be acceptable to the company. Documentation of these qualifications shall include, but is not limited to, education, experience, training, results of any qualification examination. Anywhere in there that you see that they have to have a college degree. Anything in there that says they have a high school diploma? No. Some of the best welding engineers out there don't even have a high school diploma. But by education and experience, that's number one. A lot of these guys, are superintendents in inspection positions. So you might see a question somewhere that says, in order to be a welding inspector, you must have a BS from an approved college. True or false? False at this point. Most companies now require you to have, at a minimum, an AWS, American Welding Society, CWI, or I should say at minimum, a CAWI, a Certified Associate Welding Inspector. The difference between a CWI and a CAWI is the score you get on the test. If you don't quite make the score passable, they will make you a CAWI. And you can do most everything a CWI does as long as you're supervised by a CWI or a senior. Very few guys are seniors. All right. Under visual examinations, 8.4.3. every inspector, every engineer I have to have a visual acuity test every 6 months. If I don't have a current visual acuity record, my certificate is no good. It's invalid. Sometimes you wonder about this because you get people out there that they can't see the hand in front of their face, but they're welding inspectors. Sort of like a baseball umpire that has really thick glasses or something, you know. Notice per code, all NDT personnel, so that includes the inspectors, that includes the technicians that do the X-ray, that do the UT, that do the PT, that do the MT, any of those things, shall be examined to ensure that they have a natural or corrected near distance acuity in at least one eye. One eye will do. Such that each individual is capable of reading a Jaeger No. 1 test chart, which is about 20/20, of a distance not less than 12 inches. So if you have to be able to read a certain line when it's held from your face 12 inches so that you can make out fine, small detail. That's important, don't you think? If you can't make out small detail when you're looking up closer to 12 inches, what are you doing acting as an inspector?
So, I may have heard it wrong.
Sure.
So, for that test, they hold it 12 inches away, or no less than 12 inches?
Depends. Place where I go, they put a thing on your eyes. They flip the charts down.
I gotcha.
And so it's done optically with lenses and things. But if they stand you up across the room, there might be a wall chart on the room, you know, with the E's that go up and down and sideways and all that.
Yeah.
They'll tell you, can you read line 7? No, but I can read line 8. Well, if you can read line 8, then you're better. So you read line 8 and you're better than 20/20. So that's what they're testing for at near vision. Color vision is an interesting one. You have to be not colorblind. You can't be colorblind.
Why would that matter?
Yeah.
For weld, for
Yeah.
inspecting welds?
That's good. Good question. Why not? Let's say you're inspecting some titanium welds. Color's a big difference. Blue is
Okay.
busted.
Fair.
Now you take it one step further. I have an additional certificate called a CRI, Certified Radiographic Interpreter. I have to take an additional test, which is a grayscale test. And part of that test is there's a long tray of little, they're like the tops off of this marker. There's about 25 of them. And they go from purple to teal to tan to beige. And you have to put them in order. All of them have to be in order of ascending or descending, however you line them up. Amount of hue from light tan to dark tan to very light purple to indigo. You have to be able to put those in order. And it makes sense because some of the welds that we inspect, color makes a big difference. If you can't tell blue from gray, then you're not going to be able to inspect very well. So there's a color portion to this. You have to have this every 6 months to hold these certificates. In addition, I was talking about the grayscale. For if you're a radiographic interpreter, you have to be able to see the difference in densities of gray. There's no such thing as a shadow in X-rays. People say that all the time. Oh, there's a shadow. I can see the shadow of that right there. That's not a shadow. There's no such thing as a shadow in X-ray. You're taking a picture, but the picture you're taking is that material's ability to absorb or pass, gamma radiation. So you don't say there's a shadow, you say there's a density differential. You still catch people saying shadow, and hate people that just constantly are reminding people, there's no such thing as a shadow. Well, it's a density differential, and you have to be able to know that, because when you're looking at x-rays trying to figure out cold lap or lack of fusion, you're looking at density differentials. Okay. So there is a very distinct portion of the code that talks about a person's visual acuity, color vision, and then also grayscale density differential. And this says a year, it says near vision examination shall be administered at least annually. Color differentiation examination shall be repeated at least every 5 years. The companies that I work for, they call me and say, your visual acuity is up next month. We need a current visual acuity. So I have to go to my doctor up here in North Ogden, and I have to go through the whole rigmarole to get that vision certificate. AWS sends it, you can get it from AWS, and then you give it to them and they fill it out. What?
It's a bribery stuff.
I guess. I like having my eyes looked at though. So I don't mind it at all. The thing I hate, we've started doing it, I don't know, how long has this been going on? Like the last 5 to 7 years, where you have to put your eyes in there and they take this photograph of your eyes. Oh, Jesus, like an atomic bomb went off in your eyes. I hate that. But they look at your retina. You can tell a lot about your health by looking at your retina. So I have to endure that every now and then.
Wouldn't that damage your eyes some?
You would think so, but no.
So they say.
They tell me no. I've had to do it since '84, but it seems like in the last 5 or 7 years is when they've been doing this. What they do now, or what they did before, is they take a light and they would look in your eye and they would shine that light all over your retina. Now we're like, you probably had it done. I hate it. Yeah. Now they just take a really fast poof, a really fast flash, and it burns some of the rhodopsin off the back of your eye. For instance, you see these 2 glowing orbs for a while until the rhodopsin covers the rods and cones again, and it's gone. But you're born with all the rhodopsin you're going to get. So the more bright light you look at, the more you burn that stuff up. That's why guys get my age, they can't drive at night, because night's just a big blur. They don't have enough, light acuity to be able to see lights. But so far, I'm still good. Knock on wood. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. Now we're going to look at one of my favorite points of argument. This is the acceptance standard for non-destructive testing. For non-destructive testing. Rights of rejection. All non-destructive test methods are limited in the information that they can be derived from the indications they produce. What? All non-destructive test methods are limited in the information that can be derived from the indications they produce. Now you're going to get out there in the real world, or maybe you're already there, and they're going to come back and they're going to say, well, the x-ray said this, so we got to cut this out. Well, the next step you might want to take if you go into this portion of our illustrious field is to get the radiographic interpreter's certificate, because I would go out in the field and we would take some x-rays or something, and the x-ray technician would walk out and put tape or ribbon around something, and he would just write reject on it.
Not his job.
Huh?
Not his job.
Not his job, exactly. And you always have to have this come to Jesus meeting with him, I guess I can say that. You have to have this meeting with him. It's like, you're taking pictures for me. I'll interpret those results. Well, you don't know what you're looking at. Well, yeah, I do. Because I've been looking at x-rays since before you were born, and I do know what I'm talking about. And I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of these things. And if you have something that you're concerned about, you call me to come take a look at that. I'll take a look at it, and I will decide whether we reject it or It's not the non-destructive testing personnel's job to do that interpretation. And it's because of that line right there. Right? In a lot of company manuals, they'll have a procedure manual for the inspection of wells. And they're moving away from this for liability reasons, but for all my life, in these procedure manuals for the company, it will say the certified welding inspector shall have the final say in the disposition of all welds and in all non-destructive testing results. So it's the certified welding inspector or the welding engineer that has that right to reject. Except if you're following the document of the article that we read first part of the semester, where it says a welding inspector can't reject a weld. Only an engineer can reject a weld. This is where I just call bogus on that whole thing, because that is not true at all. That happens less than 10% of the time. It's usually the welding inspector that's making the judgments as to whether that weld can be accepted or rejected. And if you don't accept it, you have by default rejected it. So those rights of rejection.
Okay. Yes, I agree. But I mean, at Peterson, I don't know if it's universal, but we have what's called an NCR, non-compliance report, and they're a pain in the ass. And there are a lot of inspectors that's the only adrenaline rush they get is writing one of those. So they jump the gun. They jump the gun and write an NCR on something that they haven't even finished inspecting yet. Anyway, I would argue that is not their job. But and there's a difference between not accepting something and rejecting something in that sense. Would you agree?
Yeah. Peterson is a little bit of an anomaly.
Yeah.
The way they treat inspectors, the way they look at inspectors is a little bit different. It's because of the kind of work that they do, mostly. There's lots of layers of overlap. And it's, in some cases, my brother worked out there for a long time. He finally just threw his hands up and left. Because if you're a Peterson, you can override any inspector.
If your last name is Peterson?
Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
Peterson, or there's another name.
Grange.
Grange?
Yep.
Yeah, there was a couple of families out there.
Peterson's, Grange, Hardy, and Steeds.
Yeah.
If you're one of them, your shit doesn't stink.
That's right. Yeah. So I actually applied many years ago out there to be an inspector. And when I walked around, interviewing for the job, it's like, these guys aren't inspectors. These are paper pushers. These are guys that, we got this weld finished here, so we need this paperwork filled out so that you can stamp it so you can turn it in. It's like, I have to look at it. No, it's like, everything's good. In fact, we've moved it over to the next bay, and we just need all the paperwork done. So an inspector is just a guy that fills out paper. So it's a bit of an anomaly.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's a bad thing.
Part of it depends.
They do.
There's a shit ton of paperwork with that nuclear stuff.
Yes.
But
And depending on your personalities, I really hope every single one of you gets a job on a nuclear job somewhere, just once. Because you either love it, because it will take 4 weeks to make one 6-inch weld. I am not kidding.
I never have high blood pressure before.
If you can slow down that much, this is one reason why I don't like working up on the base. I can't slow down that much. It's just meat and potatoes to me. It's just, let's get it done. Let's have the people that have been around a long time take a look at that, make sure that we've done it right, and we can fill out the paperwork as we go, but let's move on. Let's make production, because production is money. But man, if you get a nuclear job, I always run out of time.
I'm sorry.
I get telling stories, but no, it's very valid for this class. I had a couple of inspection chiefs over me that were from the nuclear field. It was hell on earth.
It makes you paranoid.
Really does. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these when we're doing radiographic testing, and that's what a lot of this is done in API is a lot of radiograph. One of the cheapest things that we find is IP. It's known as IP. And you need to kind of take a look at this. I don't know, take pictures or look in the book. There are lots of rules to this, but this is what IP is, right here. So if you have a weldment here and you've made a couple of welds, and you can see right here where it hasn't tied the bottom part of that root together, that's called IP, or incomplete penetration. If you find incomplete penetration in radiography, does it mean that if you find a half an inch of IP, does that mean we have to reject the whole thing? No, there's little rules that you have to live with. The length of an individual indication of IP exceeds 1 inch. IP shall be considered a defect should any of the following conditions exist. If you have something that exceeds 1 inch, if it's 1 inch, does it pass? Read the language.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, because it doesn't exceed 1 inch. Okay? The aggregate length of indications of IP. You can have several little chunks of IP. Good morning. You can find several chunks of IP in the entire length of a weld that are all small. 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. Okay? But what you have to do, the aggregate length in any continuous 12 inches exceeds 1 inch. So it's 1 in 12. One that is longer than 1 inch in 12 inches, or the aggregate measured accumulation of all of those in 12 inches. Okay. The aggregate length of indications exceeds 8% of the weld length in any weld less than 12 inches. So less than 12 inches, 8% of the length. 10-inch weld would then be 0.8, so about 7/8 of an inch. You could have that much. So these rules, you have to know these rules to be a good radiographer, to be a good inspector, or even an engineer that's looking at welds, which is pretty rare. Anything that exceeds this is a bust. Okay? The next one is similar. I'm going to put them like this. This is called IPD. IPD. This is an indication where you got the one side tied together and you're continuous, you have a homogeneous weld there, but over here on the other side, it's not quite tied together. That's called IPD. The difference is, IPD shall be considered a defect should any of the following conditions exist. The length of an individual indication exceeds 2 inch. So if it's 2 inches long, is it okay?
If it's 2 inches.
If it's 2 inches long, it's okay. Any indication. It has to exceed 2 inches. The aggregate length of indications of IPD in any 12 inches exceeds 3 inches. So you might have several little indications of it, but now you get 3 inches in any 12. So you're doing a 4-inch pipe for your test. What's the length of your weld? C equals pi D. 3.14 times the diameter. So it's going to be more than 12 because 4-inch pipe is 4 5/8 OD. So 3.14 times 4.625. It's going to be longer than 12 inches. So in that 12 inches, you're going to be allowed to have 3 inches accumulated of IPD. How does that happen? When stuff doesn't get lined up properly. Or sometimes you have a left-handed welder and the weld is really built for a right-handed welder. So the guy's kind of doing backhand trying to get the thing done, and the angle of the rod or something like that, the angle of the gun, is not quite getting the other half of that side of the weldment. And that can occur. Okay. Can you have misalignment like this and still make it work? Happens all the time. But you gotta have a welder that's skilled enough to be able to capture both sides of that. Happens all the time. Okay, so 2 inches, IPD, 2 inches, exceeds 2 inches, or the aggregate exceeds 3 inches. Another similar one is inadequate cross penetration. So you have a weld on one side, you have a weld on the other side, and they've left a little hole in the middle. They didn't quite get tied to. Some of you guys that are doing the saw work, you might have a little inadequate cross penetration, ICP. Okay. How much can you have? 2 inches. The length of any individual ICP exceeds 2 inches. The aggregate length of indications in any 12 inches exceeds 2 inches. So it's 2 and 2. It has to exceed that number. You get a lot of people that they will see that 2 inches, and sometimes you have to pull out your ruler and you have to measure it. Well, it's 1 and about 30 seconds. So it's not even 2 inches.
Good, yeah.
Yeah.
I had an inspector ask me which tick was an 8 mark.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Understand that one? Here's the next one. Incomplete fusion. We're going to look at some x-rays so you can see some of it. Incomplete fusion will end up with something like this in a weld, where this didn't quite melt into here, or this didn't quite melt into here. These are both on the surface. So as a surface imperfection between the weld metal and the base metal that is open to the surface, there's a difference. Some of these are internal, some of them are external. The ones that are internal are the ones that are really hard to see and read. You have to be a CRI to be able to determine that. Or you have to be a radiography guy that really understands that. Okay, so if you have 1 inch, or it's longer than 1 inch of IF, it's a failure. The aggregate length of IF in any 12 inches is 1 inch. The aggregate length of indications of IF exceeds 8% of the weld length in any weld less than 12 inches. Lack of fusion. That's a bad one. Okay. Here's another one. Incomplete fusion due to collapse. What's the difference between that one and that one?
Exterior and interior.
That's interior. That's considered surface. Right? So for IFD, when you're looking at this, IFD is 2 inches. IF is 1 inch. 1 inch. Okay. Or 8% if less than 12 inches. This is 2 inches long, so you can have more of this than you can this. Why?
You tied in. It's not a guaranteed split. Well, I guess it's still not. But like the other one, it has potential to split right there, and the other one is just like a bridge. It's still tied into the sides.
Okay. I think you're saying the right thing. It's a difference between a separation between the weld metal and the parent metal for the first one. And the second one is a separation of the weld metal from the weld metal. Okay. So this one here, they allow a little more of because, well, why?
There's some give.
Which is stronger, the parent material or the weld?
The weld.
So you're allowed a little bit more IFD than you are IF. Internal concavity. This is an interesting one. We got to pay attention to this one because you'll see internal concavity a lot. See that right there? The edges at the root have been tied in, but you've got a little bit of, right here, we call that a suck back a lot of times. Okay. But notice, any length of IC is acceptable.
What?
Any length of IC is acceptable, provided the density of the radiographic image of the IC does not exceed that of the thinnest adjacent parent material. So you have to look at the X-ray and you look at the density right here, and then you look at the density here. Which one's going to be denser? Which one has more distance from there to there, or from there to there? So on an X-ray, when you're looking at that, one is going to be darker gray than the other one. And they actually have, to rule out human error, they have a densitometer. It's a device that you stick the X-ray in, and you push down on the button, and it energizes the machine, and it measures the density. And it will say, this parent material is 3.0. That's the density of the parent material. And then we test this portion of the weld right here. And that density comes back at 3.18. It's denser than the parent material. Does it pass? Yes. Because you can have 100% internal concavity or concavity of the weld. You can have 100% so long as it's not less than the density of the parent material. Did you catch that? Yeah. So I know there's a question on the test that talks about you have a certain weld, a fillet weld or something like that, and the density is, on the root pass, you can see on the backside there's a concave looking weld to the backside, and the density of the vertical flange is something 2.78, and the density of the weld is 2.99. Does the weld pass? Yeah, because it's thicker than the parent material. The density tells you the thickness of the material. The denser it is, the whiter it's going to be. The thinner it is, the darker it's going to be. And we'll take a look at some of these. Okay, so that's one that you got to pay attention to. I see a lot of this going, man, we can't have that. Yeah, you can. You can have it 100%. I mean, I can tell you about a dirt throwing, shoving match that went on in Salt Lake City over a weld that was perfectly acceptable. But, we had a superintendent who said, we are not going to allow this horse shit going on in my life. Well, yeah, the code is there for a reason. And I'm here to interpret the code for you, not you. He took his thumb and he went, you mean to tell me that right there isn't concavity? I said, and I grabbed his hand by his thumb, and I held his thumb up like that, and I said, yeah, but that's not the instrument for measuring concavity or undercut. And I reached into my pocket and I pulled out my VWAC. And I said, that's the gauge for measuring concavity. And you know why that's the gauge for measuring concavity? Because it's not attached to your hand. Guess who won? Okay. Concavity is one we get into all the time. Burn through. You have to pay attention for areas that exceed the density of the thinnest adjacent material. You have to jump to BT, which is a burn through, which is the next one. And look at all of this information for burn through. There's a lot of if, and if this, then that, if that, then this, and that sort of thing. And I'm kind of out of time, but I'll stop right here. Burn through is defined as a portion of the root bead where excessive penetration has caused the weld puddle to be blown into the pipe or in a weldment. We're looking at API because it's simplest. For pipe with a specified OD greater than or equal to 2 inch, a burn through shall be considered a defect should any of the following conditions exist. The maximum dimension exceeds 1/4 of an inch. And the density in any portion of the burn through's image exceeds that of the thinnest adjacent parent material. It can be bigger than 1/4 of an inch. so long as the density is okay. The first thing that you look at is the dimension of it. If it's a 1/4 inch, then you measure it. If it's not a 1/4 inch, you don't measure it for this size pipe. Maximum dimension exceeds the thinner of the specified wall thickness is joined, and the density in any proportion of the BT's image exceeds that of the thinnest adjacent parent material. So the maximum dimension exceeds the thinner of the specified wall thicknesses joined. So if you're doing 135.135, which is a common pipe, believe it or not, and the size of that burn through is 125, you're still okay. If it exceeds 135, then you gotta look at it. And then the sum of the maximum dimensions of separate BTs, and this is what you see more than anything. Because you get these guys that run all over the country, and they're hot pass hands. That's what they call themselves. I'm a hot passer. So they're famous for like really welding the hot second pass, but they produce burn throughs all over I've had to shut several of them down and tell them, you're going to have to change this completely. This is totally out of spec. Yeah, but this is the way I run it. Yeah, I can't do it because I'm done seeing burn throughs on this work. So you get that under control. You do one more burn through and you're gone. Smaller diameter pipe. For pipe with specified OD less than 2 inch shall be considered defect when any of the following conditions exist. The maximum dimension exceeds 1/4 inch. Kind of the same, right? So 1/4 inch is the sweet spot you're looking for. A burn through shall be considered defect when any of the following conditions exist. Maximum dimension exceeds 1/4 inch, and the density in any portion of the burn through's image exceeds that of the thinnest adjacent parent material. We'll look at some of these, but they look somewhat like this. That's what they look like. They kind of look like a knot hole. So what you do is you put your densitometer right there. And if that density is less than here, then that's a defect. Has to be fixed. Okay. Just have a couple more of them, but I think I probably bored you to death, or we've got more to look at. So, believe it or not, those are acceptable levels of porosity for ATI. Okay. So we've got a couple more. We'll take that up on Friday. Have a quiz on Friday. Looking at what I've looked at so far, not too bad, but the quiz on Friday, I wanted to emphasize with you to be sure you understand the difference between essential variables and non-essential variables. We cannot change an essential variable. It changes the procedure. You can change a non-essential variable without affecting the procedure. Within the limits of a non-essential variable, there are some areas of leniency. Going from X42 pipe to X50 pipe, okay. Going from X60 down to X42, okay. You're still in the same group. You're still in the same strength group. Welding rod, you're still in the same group. You're okay there. Those are essential variables that you have a little bit of movement in. Non-essentials, you can, within reason, you can change it without changing the procedure. So I just wanted to overemphasize that just a little bit more. For quiz 4 is going to deal with that. There's 3 questions. It's more of a real life situation kind of a quiz. You know, you're doing this and this is what's happening. Are you okay? Okay. Everybody understand that concept pretty well? Okay. All right. Well, thanks for being here. And this will be online if you want to see it over again. It should be on Canvas. Any questions for me? Let's see, some people came in. Alex, I got your WPS here. Mario, if you're listening to this, I have some of your papers. I have some of these too. Alex. Colton, here's another one. Yeah, that's it. Can you shut that off for me?